I've been night fishing since my early 20s. I'm in my 40s now, and for most of that time it was the only thing that settled my head. I worked rotating shifts at a manufacturing plant in southern Illinois, and night fishing fit my sleep schedule better than daylight ever did. I wasn't chasing monsters or adrenaline. I like quiet water, familiar routes, and predictable routines. That's why what happened still bothers me years later. It didn't start strange. It started normal, and that's the part that took the longest to understand. The river I fished wasn't famous. It was a wide, slow-moving tributary that cut through farmland, timber patches, and a few forgotten access roads. Locals knew it for catfish and carp. There were long stretches where the banks were muddy and shallow, and other places where the water dropped off fast near bends. I had 6 regular spots that I rotated through, depending on water level and weather. I parked in the same places, walked the same trails, and fished the same hours. I did that for years without incident. I usually started around 10 at night and stayed until 2 or 3 in the morning. Most nights, I never saw another person. Occasionally I'd hear coyotes, owls, or the sound of cows shifting in nearby fields. That was normal. I didn't scare easy, and I didn't imagine things. If something made noise, I assumed there was a reason for it. That mindset worked fine until early spring, after a long winter with heavy snow melt. The river was high that year, but steady. The water had a strong current near the middle and shallow edges that extended farther than usual. On my first night back after the thaw, I noticed movement in the water to my left while I was setting my second rod. It wasn't sudden. It looked like a slow push through the shallows, like something large moving parallel to the bank. I assumed it was a beaver or a large carp. I'd seen both plenty of times. What caught my attention wasn't the movement itself. It was how long it stayed with me. I cast my line, adjusted the rod holder, and took a few steps downstream to grab my tackle bag. The movement stayed even with me. Same distance from the bank, same pace. I stopped. It stopped. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, watching the water. The surface smoothed out. No ripples. No splash. I shrugged it off and sat down. About 15 minutes later, I picked up my gear and walked to the next spot, about 200 yards downstream. It was a slow walk along a muddy bank with tall grass and fallen branches. Halfway there, I noticed the water moving again. Same side, same distance. No splashing, no sudden bursts, just steady displacement in the shallows. I told myself it was coincidence. Rivers carry debris. Fish move. Animals swim. I fished that second spot for an hour without anything else happening. When I left, the movement followed again briefly, then faded as the water deepened near the bend. That was the first night. I didn't think about it again until it happened the next weekend. This time, I noticed it sooner. I had just arrived at my first spot and was unloading gear when I saw the water shift before I even cast. The movement started upstream and slid down until it lined up with where I was standing. I stayed still and watched. The water wasn't churning or thrashing. It looked like something moving just under the surface, close enough to push water aside, but not break it. I picked up a rock and tossed it past the movement. The splash didn't scare it off. The shape didn't change direction. It just kept drifting along the bank, matching my position. I walked 10 steps downstream. It followed. I walked back upstream. It followed again. That was the first time I felt uneasy. Not afraid, but alert. Animals don't usually do that. Even curious ones break pattern eventually. I left early that night. Over the next month, it happened every time I night fished that stretch of river. It didn't matter which spot I started at. If I was there long enough, the movement would appear. Always on the same side of the river. Always in the shallows. Always pacing me. I tried changing my routine. I arrived later. I left earlier. I parked in different access points and walked longer routes through the brush. The movement still showed up. Sometimes it took longer. Sometimes it was already there when I arrived. One night, I brought a brighter flashlight and swept a beam across the water when I noticed it following me. The light reflected off the surface, but didn't reveal a shape beneath. The movement continued even under direct light. That ruled out a lot of animals in my mind. Most things react to light, especially sudden bright light at night. The next escalation happened when it came out of the water. I was packing up around 1 in the morning and walking back toward my truck. The path ran close to the river for about 50 yards before cutting up toward the access road. I heard wet sound behind me, heavy and deliberate. I stopped and turned around. Something moved in the grass near the bank. Not fast, not hiding, just moving. I shined my light toward it. I expected to see a deer or maybe a feral hog. What I saw didn't match either. The shape stayed low to the ground but moved with a steady, rolling motion. It didn't reflect light the way fur usually does. I couldn't see eyes. I couldn't see a clear head shape. I could see water dripping off it and dark mass shifting through grass. It didn't approach me. It stayed near the river's edge and paralleled my position again, just like it had in the water. I backed away slowly and didn't turn my back until I reached my truck. I drove home with the windows up and the radio off. After that, I stopped fishing that section of river for a while. I told myself I needed a break. I tried other spots farther away. Nothing happened at those locations. No movement, no pacing, no strange behavior. After about 6 weeks, curiosity got the better of me. I went back, but I brought a friend this time. He didn't believe my story, but he agreed to come along. We fished for 2 hours and nothing happened. No movement, no sounds. I almost felt relieved. Then my friend left early, and within 15 minutes of being alone, the water started moving again. That was the last night I fished that river. I went back one final time during daylight a few weeks later. I walked the bank and found tracks in the mud where the water had receded. They weren't deer tracks. They weren't raccoon or dog tracks. They were wide, uneven impressions that looked like something heavy had dragged itself along the edge repeatedly. I didn't take pictures. I didn't cast plaster. I didn't need proof. I had enough. That river still gets fished. People still pull catfish out of it every summer. Nothing bad ever made the news. Whatever followed me didn't attack, didn't rush, and didn't threaten me directly. It just stayed with me long enough to make it clear that it could, and that was enough to make me leave. I didn't believe in strange encounters before this happened. I wasn't looking for anything unusual, and I wasn't trying to prove anything either. I took the job because I needed quiet, steady pay, and a few months away from people. What I got instead was an experience that changed how I think about isolation, elevation, and what can exist close to you without ever showing itself. This happened when I was 29. I took a seasonal fire lookout position in the northern Rockies. I won't name the exact location, but it was on federal land, several hours from the nearest town, reachable only by a service road and then a steep hike. The lookout itself was an older structure, raised on steel legs, with small enclosed cabin at the top and open space underneath. The design hadn't changed much in decades. I arrived in early June and was scheduled to stay through September. The first few weeks were uneventful. My job was simple: watch for smoke, log weather conditions, maintain the structure, and radio and reports. I was alone most of the time, with occasional supply drops and brief radio check-ins. I liked the routine. Days were quiet. Nights were quieter. The first thing I noticed was the sound. It started during my second week. Around midnight, I heard something beneath the tower. At first, it sounded like shifting dirt or rocks settling. I assumed it was temperature change or an animal passing through. There were plenty of animals in the area. Bears, elk, mountain goats. None of that bothered me. The sound kept happening though. Not randomly. It followed a pattern. It would start about an hour after dark. Slow movement. Heavy, deliberate pressure against the ground under the lookout. Then nothing. Then it would start again, usually closer to the center beneath the structure. I leaned over the trapdoor inside the lookout and shined my flashlight straight down through the floor slats. I expected to see eyes or movement. I saw nothing. Just dirt, rocks, and the shadowed outline of the support beams. I told myself it was probably a bear using the tower as a windbreak. That explanation worked for a while. What didn't fit was how long it stayed. Most animals don't linger beneath elevated structures for hours at a time, night after night. They pass through. They sniff. They move on. Whatever was beneath the lookout stayed until just before sunrise, then left without noise. The third week, the sounds changed. Instead of shifting dirt, I started hearing something like climbing. Not on the ladder, on the legs of the structure. Slow contact. Pressure. Release. Pressure again. It wasn't loud. It wasn't frantic. It was careful. I froze the first time I heard it. I stood in the center of the lookout, listening. The sound traveled around the base, moving from one leg to another. I waited for scratching or metal flexing. Neither happened. I radioed in the next morning and mentioned animal activity. The supervisor told me it was probably a bear and to keep food sealed and the ladder pulled up at night. I was already doing that. The following night, I sat still and listened instead of trying to distract myself. Around midnight, the movement started again. This time, it stayed directly beneath me. Not circling, not wandering, just there. Then it stopped. Minutes passed. I thought maybe it had finally left. Then I felt vibration through the floor. Very slight, like weight shifting upward. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the trapdoor again. I shined the beam straight down. Still nothing visible. That's when I heard breathing. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was slow, steady, and deep, like something resting. The sound was close enough that I could tell it wasn't echoing. It was directly below the floor. I closed the trapdoor and backed away. I didn't sleep that night. From that point on, the behavior escalated gradually. It never rushed. It never made sudden noise. It adjusted to me. If I moved inside the lookout, the sound beneath shifted position. If I stayed still, it stayed still. If I leaned over the trapdoor, the breathing stopped. One night, I dropped a small object through the floor slats by accident. I heard it hit the dirt below. Seconds later, the breathing stopped completely. No movement, no sound. It stayed silent for the rest of the night. The next morning, the object was gone. I checked the ground around the lookout during daylight. There were marks in the dirt that didn't match any animal tracks I recognized. Not paws, not hooves. Long impressions, unevenly spaced, like weight had been redistributed as something repositioned itself. I took photos and sent them in. I didn't hear back. Weeks passed like this. The thing never climbed the ladder. It never tried to enter the structure. It stayed beneath me, night after night, adjusting to my presence like it was learning. The worst night happened in late July. I woke up around 2 in the morning to silence. No wind, no insects, no distant animal sounds, just nothing. Then I heard pressure against the underside of the lookout floor. Not climbing, not shifting, just contact, like something pressing upward and holding. The steel legs creaked slightly, not from strain, from redistribution of weight. I stood frozen, listening to slow breathing directly below my feet. I didn't check the trapdoor that time. I sat in the corner until sunrise. The next day, I radioed in and requested to be reassigned. I didn't explain everything. I said there was persistent animal activity that didn't match safety guidelines. They agreed to rotate someone else in. When the replacement arrived, I helped him unload supplies. I didn't mention what I'd experienced. I didn't want to sound unstable. Before I left, he casually mentioned that previous lookouts had complained about something weird under the tower over the years. No reports, no follow-ups, just quiet reassignment. I left that job early and never took another remote post again. I don't know what lived beneath that lookout. I don't know how long it had been there. I only know it understood the structure, understood my movements, and never needed to show itself to make its presence clear. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, hunted with my father, and spent most of my adult life working outdoors. I know what normal wildlife behavior looks like, especially in winter. What I saw during that winter did not fit into anything I already understood. This happened when I was 36. I had taken a temporary job managing timberland in northern Michigan. The company provided a small cabin on the property, meant for one person. It was off a logging road, about 6 miles from the nearest paved highway. The cabin had electricity, a wood stove, and a satellite phone for emergencies. No neighbors, no traffic. Once winter set in, the area became very quiet. I moved in during late October. By early December, snow covered everything and stayed that way. Most animals moved through the area early in the season and then disappeared deeper into the woods. I expected isolation. I wanted it. That was part of the reason I took the job. The first thing I noticed was tracks. Every morning after snowfall, I walked a short loop around the cabin to check for damage or fallen branches. One morning, about a week after the first heavy snow, I saw a set of tracks circling the cabin. They stayed about 20 yards out, just inside the tree line. At first glance, I assumed they were deer tracks, but when I followed them, the spacing felt wrong. Too wide in some places, too narrow in others. The pattern didn't show the bounding movement deer usually make in deep snow. I didn't dwell on it. Tracks can look strange when snow settles. The next snowfall came 2 days later. The tracks were there again. Same distance from the cabin. Same circular pattern. No signs of approach toward the door or windows. Just a slow loop around the structure. That's when I started paying attention. I checked my trail camera footage. I had set up 2 cameras for wildlife monitoring before winter. One faced the clearing in front of the cabin. The other faced the tree line behind it. Neither camera showed anything unusual. In fact, there were gaps in the footage during the hours when the tracks would have been made. No errors, no corrupted files, just missing time. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern repeated. Every snowfall, the tracks returned. They never crossed themselves. They never wandered. They never came closer than the tree line. One night in mid-December, I noticed movement outside the kitchen window around 10 o'clock. I didn't see a body. I saw a shape standing upright just beyond the reach of the porch light. It didn't move. I stood there for several minutes, watching. I expected it to step forward or retreat. It didn't. I couldn't make out details. No clear head shape. No visible arms. Just a tall, dark mass where there shouldn't have been one. When I stepped closer to the window, the shape shifted slightly, deeper into the trees. Not fast. Not startled. Just repositioned. That was the first night I locked every door and window. After that, I started noticing it more often. Always at night. Always standing just inside the tree line. Never in the same exact spot, but always at the same distance. I tested it. One evening, I shut off all the lights inside the cabin and waited. After about 20 minutes, I turned on the porch light quickly and looked out. The shape was already there, standing where it would normally be. Another night, I left the lights on and went to bed early. I woke up around 2 in the morning and checked again. It was still there. What disturbed me wasn't that it stayed. It was that it never reacted the way animals do. Animals get curious. They approach. They retreat. They investigate smells and sounds. This thing did none of that. It stayed just far enough away to remain out of clear view, but close enough to be unmistakable. As winter deepened, the tracks changed. They started closer to the cabin. Instead of circling at the tree line, they looped 10 yards out, then 8, then 5. One morning, after a heavy snowfall, I found tracks leading directly up to the side of the cabin. They stopped beneath the living room window. No paw prints, no scuffing, just deep impressions in the snow, as if something had stood there for a long time. That night, I heard slow movement outside the cabin. Not footsteps. Pressure. Snow compressing and settling. I didn't look. The next morning, I found tracks beneath every window. From that point on, the shape appeared every night without fail. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther. Always watching, always silent. The worst part was realizing it understood the structure. It never stood where light fully reached it. It never crossed open ground. When I changed the angle of the porch light, it adjusted where it stood. When I closed the curtains, the feeling of being watched didn't stop. In late January, during a severe cold snap, I woke up to frost patterns on the inside of my windows. Through the ice, I could see the shape standing closer than it ever had before, just beyond the porch. It stayed there until sunrise. I requested early termination of my contract 2 days later. The company didn't argue. They said winter assignments often ended early due to isolation stress. No one asked follow-up questions. On my last morning, before I left, I walked the perimeter one final time. The tracks were there again. This time, they didn't circle. They led away from the cabin and disappeared into the trees. I never saw the shape again. I've lived in rural areas since then. I've seen bears, wolves, and moose at close range. Nothing has ever behaved the way that thing did. It never tried to scare me away, and it never tried to approach me. It just waited, night after night, until I decided to leave on my own. That's the part that still bothers me the most.